I just hope that this final talk for today inspires you guys, lifts you up in a very specific way. So without further ado, Mr. Beau Haralson.
Thank you. Wow. There's a few slides here that I know I'm going to get a little choked up on, but I did not know I was going to get choked up on the intro. Appreciate you, Josh. So there's history, there's family, and that's what I'm here to actually talk to you guys about today. You guys, I don't know you guys, but I will tell you that you're in the rarest of rare pedigree as far as operators, and I want to make sure that you walk away knowing that to be true without a fact before you walk out of this room. I've had the privilege over the last few years to be in some really, really unique rooms, specifically as I've stepped into private equity. And one of the things that I've realized, and I kind of had a suspicion before I got into it, is that there's like this very much infinite amount of money out there looking around for deals and looking around for people that are actually hiding in this room. And it's this really, really interesting thing because I know how it feels. I ran agencies for the better part of 15 years. And I know like you're just sitting here like, my gosh, payroll's coming up, this is coming up. And if you're not careful, you're going to exist in some level of scarcity mindset just because of the grind of running an advertising agency. But what you don't realize is that there's an amazing amount of humans out there that are looking for just unicorns like you to step in and make magic in their businesses. And so I just want to make sure that, and I'll walk you guys through what that means. Actually, can we just, Josh, if I could say you for one more second, can you hand out the unicorns, brother? So you get a unicorn, everybody, I just want to make sure that you guys know, as you walk away today, that you guys are all unicorns. And I'll walk you through and make sure you know why. Let's see if we can go the right way. So it took me about 20 years to figure out some of this stuff. I really want to get this across to you guys in about 20 minutes. And then the important thing is, as I already hinted at, I've stepped into private equity over the last 2 years. I'm going to show each of you guys how to make $20 million over the next 5 years. And I'll model that all out using the skills that we've talked about, et cetera. Does that sound fair enough? Can you give me an hour to like get you into that headspace and show you that formula? Is that fair? And there's an asterisk here. Any financial claims in this presentation are speculative and for educational purposes. You get the idea. I'm not a trained professional nor an advisor in this scenario, but I will show you basic math as to how this in principle could work somehow, right? Also, another asterisk, mixed metaphors will be used throughout this presentation. Josh knows me long enough to know that I like weird analogies. So I'll walk you guys through my first 20 years in this space. You might recognize some of these faces. The important thing here, and I dropped in on the lead gen presentation, and so much of what is happening right now in your agencies is that you guys are doing an amazing job of getting clients for 30 days from now, 60 days from now, et cetera. I want to expand your brains into if there's a dream client that's on your list that you're like, I really want to get in front of that client. That's ultimately how I made my mark, is I would just stalk people, for lack of better terms, in a kind and diplomatic way, and where I'm adding value to their lives. But that's how ultimately I would pick 6 months from now, I want to be working with Netflix. How do I make that happen? And I would just reverse engineer into those relationships in thoughtful and kind ways. I would get on planes, trains, and automobiles to make that happen. And I'm happy to give maybe Josh on maybe a future webinar, a bit of a breakdown on enterprise sales. Happy to do that and walk you guys through that. But that was a lot of my career on the agency side of things. The most important thing to me are the people in these pictures here. This is Amelia in her chubby phase here with the bow. So that's my now 6-year-old daughter here in the flower dress. That's my mom and that's my dad, and then my beautiful bride of 17 years. We've been together for 21 years. And so, and then Eli, who's younger here, and then now 9 in this shot. As Josh hinted at, I'm nothing without these people. I really am not. And I've had to learn the hard way. And my dad instilled in me the values to build my life around these bigger rocks. Have you ever seen that analogy where you put like big rocks in a jar and then the sand fits around it, right? So like we'll have some conversations around what that looks like. And so my professional timeline kind of looks the same as there's big rocks and then there's small rocks. There's big rocks and there's small rocks. I don't expect you guys to read any of this, but what it is since 2005, good night. Dude. Whew. I have consistently tried to orient my life around what's important to my family or myself, and then backfilled into what that means professionally in that season. And it's often come at some cost, some life orientation, some things like that, but it's been, I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful for the mentors in my life that stepped in and said, hey, like here's some smart things, because I was living at a pretty Mad Men style pace for a hot minute. And so I'll just read you a few of these things. You're seeing the mountaintops, not the valleys, and these types of things. So I'll walk you through my kind of professional career a little bit. Starting with a marketing internship as a home healthcare agency that my mom worked with after working in a door factory for one day in August in Texas. That was my entry into marketing. I was like, I want to go work in air conditioning. Let's start there. And so that's how I got into marketing. And then after my time at school at Texas A&M, I ended up working at Office Max corporate headquarters after meeting my wife in school. Was a part of, my mentor ran the most viral campaign of the early 2000s. How many of you guys have ever elfed yourself? Do you ever remember the dancing elf and the Flash animation guy? So we made 150 million of those elves back in the early 2000s. We had 150 million opt-ins. And I asked the question in a boardroom one day, I said, how much money do we make from those 150 million elves? And no one could give me an answer. And I thought, I think I could build a career finding answers like that. And so started a digital marketing agency after 4 years of time in corporate America, of people not answering questions like that, and figuring out that I could probably help other people answer those types of questions and make a living doing that. Before I left Office Max in the peak of 2008 recession, we reversed our supply chain with a group of folks, and I became a retail vendor after becoming a retail buyer. What that means is I was making merchandising decisions on behalf of 1,000 stores, and then we thought, man, I wonder who hates running the office supply category and really hates it right now because we're in the middle of a recession. And sure enough, a lot of retailers did. So we would jump on planes, sit down, talk to the folks, be like, hey, you're over-assorted in this, you're under-assorted in this. We can give you 4 feet back to every one of your stores because you're over-assorted, and we can run the entire run of product for you guys. And so we sold into 6,000 stores in 18 months, saved 150 to 200 jobs, maybe even more, in the middle of that recession. So that was my big first foray into learning how to get really, really scrappy in the middle of a recession, and learning how to observe the market for solutions that were really quite blue ocean at the time. All right, sorry. 2 or 3 other name drop moments. Throughout my agency career, I had the opportunity to shoot a commercial with LeBron James, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Cindy Crawford. My last celebrity-oriented campaign was with Drew Barrymore. I've had stuff published in Oprah. It's whatever. I'm happy to sit and talk to you guys about that during a cocktail hour or whatever. It doesn't mean anything to me at this point. Not because those people are not important, but because it was just a moment in time in my career where I learned the speed of the game at that celebrity level and enjoyed it and jumped in and had a ton of fun doing it. But what happened in the middle of all of that, I became a father. And so back to the narrative around orienting around these big rocks. I wish I could say I've always done that proactively, but my son was born 2 months early, which means I was not ready. I had a to-do list X long before he came, and he came 2 months early, and we're driving to the hospital, and I'm thinking, man, I think I'm going to lose my son tonight. Because it's just, it's not like something that you spend time reading on what happens at 3 months early, what happens at 2 months early, what happens at 1, but I'm just driving to the hospital being like, holy crap, this is real. And I also was thinking in the back of my mind, I think I'm going to lose my business tonight as well. Because I was very much had to be the guy in the room, which we've talked about that a little bit on the ops side of things today. And so I then had to build the systems, processes, and people in place to not be the guy in the room. And that ended up being the best thing that happened to that business because I was able to sell that first agency a year after that moment, 4 years into that journey. I ultimately sold to a larger agency, which compressed my timeline quite a bit. At that point, I'd only worked with maybe 1 or 2 Fortune 500 clients, so I brought that to the roster, but they had worked with at least maybe 5 or 6. And so that combined set of case studies put me in a position where when I walked in the door, I think we were trending at about 3 to 4 million top line, and in a year and a half to 2, we took that to 10 top line. And ultimately, throughout that journey, I had yet another kid, and I had to tap the brakes yet again. And so my second, who I showed you guys a quick picture of there, her name is Amelia, and she was born with spina bifida. So spina bifida is Latin or Greek or Hebrew for an interruption in the spine. I should know if that's Latin, probably Latin. So hers happened at L5 and S1 level. We knew before she came out into the real world and hung out with us, and the doctors basically was like, hey, she's not going to be able to walk. She will likely not be able to pee or poop on her own. She'll have a lot of head stuff going on in terms of like cerebral spinal fluid going on. And it was a really, really challenging thing, as you can imagine. I have to talk about it kind of in a neutral tone, because if I go anywhere else with this, I won't make it through. So I apologize if it seems like I'm a little bit calloused in this conversation. But so we're going through that whole process. I've sold my business. I'm in my earn-out phase with this larger big agency. I'm putting in 80 to 90 hours a week on planes. And once again, I have a conversation with the man upstairs, and I go, hey, I don't think this equation's going to work out super well, right? Like, I can kind of pick 2 out of the 3 things I need to be doing right now. And I don't want to pick being on planes versus being the husband and ultimately the dad I need to be. And so I started considering in the middle of my earnout what that would look like. And how many of you guys know what I mean when I say the word earnout? Okay, cool. So usually when you sell a company, there's some sort of golden handcuffs, which I think are there to make sure that the asset is what the asset is and that you shepherd it well throughout that transition. Particularly in the professional services environment, that's very, very common, right? To make sure that you're going to help there build out. In my case, I had a sales quota since I tend to be a rainmaker. And so tied to that was a significant amount of money as well, to that back half of that second check. So now it's money or it's mission. And I was not raised to orient around anything else but mission. And so it was an obvious decision. I went and had a conversation with the boys and said, hey guys, I'm gonna have to walk away from this money, and I'm gonna pursue the mission of being a good dad, and I'm gonna figure out the rest of it along the way. And that sounds really noble. It was very hard, because I really enjoyed getting on planes, getting a call from a very Fortune 100 client. It's really kind of fun on a Thursday afternoon or a Friday afternoon, and knowing that you got to be on a plane by Monday and they want to hear what you have to say in the boardroom. That's an amazing ego play. You know what's more important? My daughter's health and my wife's sanity and all of our health as a family unit. And so I had to really, really slow down in the middle of that and do fractional CMO work. And so I've gone through this again and again and again. And what I've seen, we'll go back to that slide. Actually, let's see if audio works, because this is actually, I didn't see, this scene came out of, how many of you guys have seen the show Landman with Billy Bob? Do you know this scene? If you've seen it, but there's a scene that I was like, okay, this kind of is starting to articulate this feeling that I'm having, and also articulates where I want to go. Also, I realized that there's probably not, how many of you guys are parents in this room? So don't take a heavy-handed conversation around like parents and those types of things. We are all building legacy in our own ways, right? So I know I'm talking a lot about being a dad. I have some bias in that category. So insert your version of legacy here as you do. We'll see if the audio works. If not, I will do my best to do a Billy Bob and a John Hamm impression. So let's see here. Okay. It might not work, especially if we don't have like an HDMI hooked up. I'm going to narrate this scene to you guys real quick. So John Hamm's an oil man, and he's made Jerry Jones a lot of money in this scenario. And Jerry Jones walks into the hospital room. John Hamm's gone through his 4th heart attack. And Jerry Jones, owner of the Cowboys, walks in and he says, hey, I don't know how many times you're basically going to get at this chance to recover, because he's on his 4th heart attack. But here's what I do know, is that when I came into, when my daughter went to college, I wanted to have a little business out there where she was in college, because I wanted to have an excuse to get on a plane a little bit more and go see her. So he bought some real estate out by her college, and as opposed to just putting homes on this real estate, he put 3 or 4 oil wells on that real estate. And those 4 oil wells ultimately bought the Cowboys. And he said, you just never know where your life goals are going to intersect with your business goals. And he said, the best thing about that is I ended up than being able to do business with my family and brought them into the Cowboys, and then they became part of the journey. So you have a choice. You can build this thing for your kids, or you can build this thing with your kids. Now, I've got a 6 and a 9-year-old. My 9-year-old's an old soul. He wants a flip phone, and he wants to run a farm. He wants to be a farmer. I don't know where that intersects with my journey, but I do know that I want to bring him as much as I can along with me in that journey, and that's going to be a part of my North Star in that, right? So I did not do a good John Hamm impression or Billy Bob. So but it's an important scene. If you get a chance, punch it up. So the question is, how do you build something for the future with those that you love the most? 15 years in the agency world felt like a bit of a conveyor belt to be honest. And there's some people that are lifers in that space, and there's some people that are not. But what you're doing right now, whether you know it or not, is acquiring a certain set of skills to grow brands, right? And to do that at volume and at scale. So let's talk about what you can do with those skills. Likely, either you have a partner that's 100% right-brained, and you're 100% left-brained, or you guys are kind of weird, and you're like 50% left-brained and 50% right-brained, but you're 100% amazing operators. And I wouldn't have used the word operator 2-3 years ago until I got into private equity, and I'll talk to you about that language in a moment and why that's important. So I was trying to, again, mix metaphors. Da Vinci, did you know he could write with one hand and draw with the other hand? AI couldn't comprehend that idea and give me an image. So it just points to the fact that that's that form of a concept that we're all a little bit unique. Da Vinci would be one of them. You as agency owners, definitely of them. Here's my observation. I've worked with probably 400 founders one-to-one over a good chunk of time, and the story repeats itself in some way, shape, or form. You go through a path of becoming a king or a queen, and you're building up resilience throughout that process. Chelsea did an amazing job of talking about the second phase, which is you eventually reach market congruence, where you have a product market fit and an offering that fits, and you get to build your first castle. In that castle building phase, I've seen an amazing amount of dudes, stereotypically, if I'm picking on you guys, die in the castle alone out of ego or boredom. One of the two. And either not take an exit on time when they should, or just get bored with it, wreck it all down, and build it back up because the next shiny object came around, right? This next stage, and listen, I'm talking right back at myself. I've been there, I've done that, etc. I wasn't inspired to go to the next stage until I realized, and sorry, you guys might want to be able to read this. In the king building phase, you're learning resilience. There's not a single founder that I haven't worked with that has a minimum of 3 arrows in their back by the time they're 30. They've been betrayed, they've had business partners steal money, they haven't been paid on time, like insert any number of really crappy situations. The ones that make it past that stage into castle building are the ones that pull the arrows back out, don't become a victim, and find congruence and market fit in their next endeavor. So I'd encourage you, if you're in a king building phase right now, do not become a victim. And that's a really, really hard thing not to become when you get stabbed in the back. We've talked about the castles and the shiny objects. There's a difference between trends and paying attention to them and shiny objects. The discernment between those two things is really, really challenging, but like think about that, right? We were talking about trends as it relates to content production and content making and paying attention to that. That's different than chasing each shiny object. And then the kingdom building side of things is really the number one lesson I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years is this idea of leverage. And I used to have a really, really negative relationship with the word leverage because it sounded like this, like an elbow in my back, if you will. Leverage in the context of building out a portfolio of brands doesn't feel like that. It's more of like, how can we leverage what we built, these skills that we have and the assets that we have to build into something powerful, and I'll walk you guys through that in a moment. So what's the difference between running an agency and private equity? By the way, I'll just get the cat out of the bag. My goal here today, I'm not going to tell you guys all to leave your day jobs and to move into private equity, so just know that that's not the punchline, but I want to let you know that you have an amazing asset right in hand with what you do. So private equity is just fancy people speak for running a portfolio of brands that are privately owned by a group of investors and general partners and managing partners that help operate those brands. Does that sound similar to anything that you guys do in your day job? right? You manage a group of clients, and your number one job is to what? Grow their businesses, right? Through some tactic or through a host of tactics. So the difference is when you go through it, and when I walked into fractional CMO work, I had 5 clients at a small little kind of boutique fractional agency, and we walked 3 of those to exit. And so I learned, by sitting at those tables, I learned, number one, the language of private equity, but I also learned, number 2, that my client's best day is oftentimes my worst day in that scenario. And so that cycle repeated itself 7 times throughout my agency career, enough that I got wise enough to be like, hey, if you exit, do you mind sending me a fruit basket and maybe a few bucks? And we went through that, and that's great. The biggest difference is who owns the brands. Well, owning companies sounds expensive to a dude that was born on the other side of the tracks in Lubbock, Texas. So that's always been an intimidating factor to me, and was for sure as I stepped into this. So we'll walk into how you get into the money side of things as well. So the question is, what should I do with my agency? The answer is, hell no, don't, please. You guys have done the hard work, the HR-style work of finding some of the best talent in the marketplace to grow your companies. You're working with, and if you're not already working with Josh and the crew at Hydra, you should, to grow and get that flywheel working as efficiently as possible so that you can take care of a portfolio of brands. It's a slight difference in the positioning of what you're doing, but I want you to think about that. I've made a lot of big mistakes, but one of my bigger mistakes professionally was actually selling my agency, because with that, I lost that flywheel that was spinning out cash and those people. Now, they still happen to answer my phone calls, and I can still pull them in for projects and things like that, but it kind of sucks. Like, I wish I wouldn't have sold my agency, to be honest. It was fun to have a first exit, learn a few things, etc. But ultimately, back to the unicorn, that is your SEAL Team 6 of unicorns that you've built over the last X amount of years, right? You guys can name at least 2 or 3 employees that you have in the ranks that are like your battle buddies, right? And your co-founder or your partners, these are your trench buddies, right? These are the guys that have been through an amazing amount of work with you. So do not let go of that asset that you've fought hard for. By the way, it's fun that I can just like dream up a random metaphor and then take a picture or create a picture of it. But what I've learned being in different rooms is, like I said earlier, there's this kind of golden triangle of deals. And so how many of you guys have heard the term dry powder? Okay. So right now we've been through probably one of the most hellacious kind of like 5 or 6 years of ambiguity in the private markets that probably up there rivals with either the 80s or even the 30s in terms of the amount of like crises and crap that we've all walked through. And so where there's ambiguity and net new crises going on, people do what? They hold on to their wallet. And that's no difference, right, than what's going on. And so there's literally, I think, 16 years worth of capital sitting in coffers and of private investors it would take 16 years to deploy that amount of capital on the average transaction volume that we had pre-COVID. I'm going to slow that down. That's just an amazing amount of money that's waiting to find the right deals with the right operators tied to it to deploy on those, okay? So, how many of you guys are advertising agency owners? Wrong, you're operators. You are people that have a very unique skill of running and managing a portfolio of brands and growing those brands. And you're high capacity leaders in that skill. That's what you are. And if you look at that framework through the lens of the room that I was in last night here in Nashville, I went to a family office conference last night that happened to be here in town as well. 10 NFL guys, 5 or 6 NBA guys, probably 40 what are called family offices. How many of you guys have ever heard that term, family office? Okay, cool. Basically, it's just a fancy way of saying a family that happens to have a lot of money that invests that money into buying companies, right, or other investments. Guess what of that room of, let's call it 70 people we're desperate for? A safe pair of hands to put their portfolios in with high capacity leaders. Now, here's what they're typically doing with that money. They come in, they buy what's called a platform company, which is private equity speak for a company that's doing between $3 to $10 million in EBITDA, and they buy that company first with a good chunk of money, and then they hope and pray that the operators of that company are good enough to help them can build that portfolio out. And so when that person was building that company, they didn't build that company with the idea of running a portfolio of companies that's running that company with roughly $3 to $10 million of EBITDA. That's a big company. That's a very profitable company. But the humans that are in that company did not join that company with the idea to manage the next bolt-on and the next company and the next company and the next company into that portfolio. And so guess what happens to the souls of the humans that are working in that first acquisition as they get bolted on, right? And as they start to Frankenstein out this whole portfolio of companies. The souls of the humans in that first company get crushed. And you guys have heard of people buying their own companies back from private equity for pennies on the dollar. And that story is repeating itself again and again and again because the humans at the center of that are not built to do the things that we do day in and day out as agency owners. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. So, what do I mean by deals? Deals is just fancy speak for a company that might be open to an acquisition at some point in time in their future. Is it fair to say that some of your clients at some point in time would like to be acquired? Fair assumption? Is it fair to say that you, if you cracked open that conversation with your client or with someone at a conference or with your niche that you're in, that you could probably get 4 or 5 people that would have a conversation around being acquired or open themselves up to investment? Is that fair? Do you know that there's Harvard-educated people that will pay a human $200,000 a year to run a search fund, right? And a search, what's called a mandate, and we'll give them 2 years to find one qualified deal ready enough to close. That's $400,000 invested in one deal. I kid you not, this happens every day of the week in private equity. Is it fair to say that you could find 1 or 2 folks in your network and it would to say yes to a potential deal of an acquisition? I'm not asking you right now to be a deal maker, but just like by hearsay alone, more than one qualified deal that you could sell dime to private equity or run yourself. Is that fair? For me, organically over the years, I would say probably about 10 a quarter of people that would say, hey, we were hoping to build this thing to exit or something like that in a sales conversation or in the client fulfillment side. So what do you do with that energy? What do you do with that opportunity? We don't go backwards in the presentation. So, well, let's break this down. So, like we said, the deals are the brands that you might already know or the networks that you're already hanging out in within your industry. The money could come from a rich uncle or the people that I know if you have the idea to buy your next client, which is what I'm heavily advocating you guys for, which we'll get into in a second. And then you need to reframe yourself as an operator of a portfolio of brands. Fair? Okay. See if I can go the right way. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, I'd recommend you can either crawl, you can walk, or you can run into it. I'm built a little bit differently. I like to run. So once I understand the mechanics of a new game, I like to just go ahead and say, hey, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it 20% harder and get to the end game versus the in-between game. That's my own. But I did kind of crawl and walk, run into some of these things. So the way to crawl, walk, and run into this would be, first of all, get comfortable having conversations consulting for equity. You cannot build a profitable agency consulting for equity. But if you don't have a separate LLC for consulting or advisory work, do that right now. Have a sandbox for that because the opportunities are going to come. And you can do that without betraying your agency as well. My first consulting for equity agreements, I said no to. And then I learned, I said, hey, if you pay a retainer to my agency, we can do it on a friends and family discount. And this is with permission of my co-founders, right? You're going to pay maybe 20 or 30% less, and then we'll put in the sweat equity and an advisory level for the rest for maybe 5 points in the company and grow it. So we're somewhat putting our money where our mouth is, but we're also getting some points along the way. Do not work for free for equity. Most people that are actually pitching you that actually just don't have enough money to even pay for a retainer. And that's not the client or the company you want equity in anyway. Fair? You could buy your next client. You can go through an SBA loan, SBIC loan, any number of ways to buy a client. Once again, don't do this all at once and all of a sudden wake up with 6 clients that you own on the roster and 2 clients paying the bills for your entire team. Great way to like get a lot of gray hair and get a lot of stress. But Eddie and I talk about this quite a bit. It's a great way to get into it. There's a few different ways you can do that. Most of those ways require what's called a PG, or personal guarantee, for that loan to buy a company. I don't love risking my house on these types of strategies. Not that I don't trust my ability to implement, but there's a way to do this without risking your house on a PG to buy a company. And so this is a unique situation where if you actually skip to the run phase, you can build out a portfolio that's big enough that you don't have to PG it on your own assets, but you can actually personally guarantee, it can be guaranteed essentially on the assets that you're buying if they're healthy enough. And this is where Cody Sanchez and other people talking about business buying get it completely wrong. And I would say that with them in the room. I know a few of these guys, and that's where I'll put it. The reason that they do that in the info marketing space is because it's a broader market to pitch to, of like, hey, buy a company for $0 down, right? That's compelling from a marketing standpoint. But the way that the like old guard of private equity operates, they're not in the mood for distressed assets. Yeah, there might be like 1 or 2 distressed asset pickup that happens throughout like this world. I was about to disclose something under NDA. So there's a few that I've seen happen, but mostly they want cash-producing assets that allow a company to, or an entity to deploy over 10 to 30 to 40 or $50 million. And so that leads us to kind of the run stage of what this looks like. Keep going backwards. Okay. It's probably a little bit squinty for those of you guys in the back, so I'll walk this through verbally as best I can. So we just raised our hands and said we could probably see, 5 to 6, 7 deals organically within our network a quarter. Is that fair? Just random people saying, hey, they're thinking about selling. And if you follow Chelsea's leads, you're in a niche already, right? So we have the blue-collar guys. We have people in interesting niches. In private equity, there's this thing called a roll-up. Not a fruit roll-up. Kids of the 90s, sorry. But a roll-up of that creates an arbitrage opportunity. So okay, let me slow down here for a quick second. So we have 7 deals that we might see within any given quarter. Most of those deal sizes that we're working with are probably in the $2 to $3 million EBITDA range max. Quick pause. How many of you guys know what I mean when I say EBITDA? Sweet. All right, I'll pace a little faster. So we've got 2, 1.5, and 750K. Pretty average deal sizes around the companies that you might find yourself working with. And they're not going to disclose net profit to you too much, but just go with me. On average, you could probably put an LOI in front of either of those companies at roughly somewhere around the 3 to 4x range or 2 to 3x range, depending on the industry. If you're in commercial roofing, you should be getting probably 5 to 6, maybe even 7x on that. So there's exceptions to the norm. I can talk to you guys about the multiple side of things. And when we work our deals, we actually will not go above 3x for a deal that we buy. We just won't. Because we'll go find another $2 million EBITDA company that believes in our mission and knows where they're going with that. Our deal structures cap out at that 3x level because we want to make sure we create the arbitrage for that. Where I, again with some bias, consider our approach to be not predatory is we actually give rollover shares into the entity, the portfolio company, into that, and by the time they actually get what's called the second bite of the apple, or that second check when we go sell that portfolio, they blend up to right around 5 to 6x. So I'll give you an example of that. I was talking to a roofer up in the Midwest. He sold, committed for 8x on his 4.1 mil EBITDA company. And I knew I would never be able to come in there with a check that big. So I asked this guy, George, I'll call him George. So I talked to George and I said, hey, it doesn't seem like you're happy with this. And he's like, I'm not. I actually just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to back out of that contract because they were going to do that bolt-on plus bolt-on plus bolt-on and basically take his company down to the studs. And he didn't believe he was ever going to get that second check that brought up the total valuation up to 8x. And I said, George, what's important to you? By the way, best question you could, there you go. There's my enterprise sales workshop where I just talked about Josh. Talk to your people about what's important to them. Shocker. They get talking, and then you can actually understand how to actually help them out. So I said, George, what's important to you? He said, I've done battle with these guys for 10 years in my roofing company, and I have my Lamborghini, I have my rental properties, I have my boat. How do you make those guys millions of dollars? And I'll show you in the next slide how I said, hey, this is how I make your battle buddies their money as well. I put a 3x offer on his table a week after that conversation. I opened up a blank Excel spreadsheet. I told him exactly where I make money, where my investor makes money, where the bank makes money, and where he makes money, and more importantly, where his battle buddies make money. And he signed within 3 days of getting that LOI at 3x. Is that opportunistic or is that predatory? Or is it just kind? Is it just like literally just creating a triple win? I don't know. You guys tell me. I'm working through that. But where the arbitrage shows up is we just stacked 3 companies in this example at $4.25 million of EBITDA. Blended, I'm buying somewhere between 2 to 3x of EBITDA, which puts me at a $12 million total enterprise value. Total enterprise value is different than, well, sorry, I'm going to, I know this is the end of day. Are we having fun? Okay. All right. So I don't have $12 million. Full stop. I got a decent watch on today, but I don't have $12 million. Okay? Where am I going to get $12 million? Well, on the secondary market, there's lenders that will say, hey, if this is a cash-producing asset on their AR, and if you can show me good long-term history, I will lend you a certain amount of money for that asset. Here's the deal. It's just like a house. You got to bring a certain percentage down as equity. Depending on the assets, depending on the lender, sometimes you can get $3 in debt for every $1 you have in equity. Sometimes you can get $4. BlackRock gets $3, but they could presumably go deeper on that if they wanted to. I like to take on as much debt as possible. Again, I'm not PGing this debt. It's based on the assets of the companies themselves. And I make sure that my liquidation value always puts my investors in a place where at a minimum they could make 2x on their dollars because I'm buying so low. Okay, so I mentioned earlier there's like a commercial plumber. We're buying a commercial plumber next month. They're doing 3.1 EBITDA. I'm buying them for 3x, which is crazy. They've been around for 20 years. On the open market, I could sell that company for 6x. I actually got an offer on it pre-acquisition for 6x. I think my investors are safe, right? So that's mission number 1, make sure your investors are safe. Mission number 2, make sure there's meat on the bone, obviously for the seller, and for you. And third in line, appropriately so, is what's called a GP, or an operator of this thing, right? Okay, so that's how we're buying. You make your money when you buy the thing. Same as cars. Okay, so on the right-hand side, we buy these 3 companies, ideally as close to buying them all at once. We grow those companies. How many of you guys have grown a company 5% year over year? 10% year over year, top line. 15% year over year. 20, okay, I get the point. You're ballers, I get it. You guys actually do this stuff. We make an assumed growth rate of 15% and then 25% year 2. That's up there, and we're talking about EBITDA and profit right in this scenario. But just for sake of fun, that puts this portfolio at $7 million in EBITDA. I'll show you the chart. So, in general, keyword, a company above $5 million puts you in somewhere in the 5 to X range of a multiple. Guess what we just did? We bought something at 3X, we grew it, and we got to that magical number in this scenario of getting north of 5 million. Remember that whole portfolio is worth 4.25. Now it's up to 7 million. And now I can trade to the mid-market at right around 7x, call it. Okay? So the delta on that is $47 million. 7 times 7 is 49. I got to pay back my lender. I got to pay back a few things. That's not perfect math, but in general, it's right around $40 million of a delta. And we did that in 2 years' time. Does that sound too good to be true? Slightly. It's going to take about 2.5 to 3 years. But I think, and I know, that based on the deal volume that you guys see in this room, that's actually very feasible. The third missing ingredient in that is, who do you sell that thing to? This is industry specific. I, for the moment, am enjoying home construction, home services, those types of things. So I've gotten to know the deal origination teams in what's called the mid-market that will buy according to these multiples. And so I verbally come in, I go, hey, if I build something like this, would you buy it roughly for that? And the answer in my scenario is yes, which is why I keep going, right? So that does, I know it seems too good to be true, but with the volume of deals that you guys see, it could be true. I'm going to flip this the right way up. And thank you, guys. Wrong way. I never said I was the sharpest crown in the box. Okay. So where do your investors make money and where do you make money in this scenario? Anyone heard of a waterfall? How that works? Not going chasing waterfalls, but in the context of what we run is called an independent sponsor model. I'm getting relatively technical, but I'm getting a lot of head nods that people are like kind of following along or know enough of this language. When we raise money, we say, hey, dear investor, you get second to the bank, you get the next dollar Class A shares, right? So you share on the first part of this waterfall. We take the least amount of money off the first multiples that we sell at. We want to make sure you're taken care of. Oh, by the way, are you comfortable with us eating pretty well after we get to a certain multiple range? And the investor says, wait, I'm going to be taken care of around 3 to 4 to 5x, depending on the multiple, and that's going to be about a 3-year lockup. I say, yeah. So are you comfortable with me eating more after the 4 to 5 to 6x exit? And they say, sure. That's basically what this is saying. So the investor eats here in the green, and then we as the managing partner group, i.e. operators of this portfolio, eat on the yellow side of things. On that delta that we talked about, which there's transaction fees and all those types of things. So worst case scenario, that blends down to $40 million after you pay an amazing amount of lawyers that are involved in these types of things and bankers. Roughly speaking, we got to that $20 million delta. Now, I'd highly not recommend doing that on your own. So pick your 2 best friends that you have done a lot of good work with, that have a lot of credibility, and go build a roll-up if this is of interest. Because I think you guys can do it. Now, when should you consider something like this? That's a question I can't answer for you. But I will tell you this. With my daughter and my why, this puts me in a position where I'll never have to say no to any of her medical care ever again. A year ago, we were gearing up to go to Florida to go see her orthopedic surgeon to actually get a tendon transfer for her done, which will ultimately help her walk better. And I got a call the day before we got on a plane, and they said, I'm so sorry, sir, your insurance has been denied. It was deemed a pre-existing condition versus something that happened over the last whatever. And I knew I was walking a fine line on that front, and I said, well, that's a bummer, because we got our tickets bought, we got the lodging set up, we're coming out. Like, you can imagine a mom and a dad gearing up for a surgery in a different state. And I said, how much are we talking about here for the surgery just out of pocket? I said, well over $300,000 to $400,000. Once again, I got a decently nice watch on today, but I don't have 300 to 400 liquid. And it killed me to have to say no in that moment. And so whatever your why is, I like talking about money. I love talking about legacy. And that's the conversation I'm trying to have with you guys today. The businesses that we buy, 1 out of 11 of these businesses typically have a successful exit. I'm sitting in the living rooms with 63-year-old men, stereotypically, and their wives that have built a plumbing company that's gearing up to do the Terminal 1 and Terminal 2 refresh on Orlando International Airport. And the guy looks at me and he goes, I didn't know this thing was sellable. Because he didn't take the time to put in the systems in place and get the education to get that thing ready for an exit. That's a very sellable asset. And we're going to make sure that it's ideally around at least through his kids, part of his kids' legacy as well. Okay. We talked a little bit about one acquisition that we're coming up on, the $3 million EBITDA plumber and the exterior stucco and paint company. You guys saw my background. What am I doing with paint companies and plumbers? And how does that all translate? At some point, you guys can know with the reps and sets, it's all just shapes. And what I mean by that is you get used to levers and growing businesses. I don't need to know about exterior stucco and paint companies. I need to know what's important to that company to make sure that he's fed and that company is fed as I step into it. My ultimate secret sauce is enterprise sales. So if I could take a case study from the Orlando International Airport and walk that into the Hilton and Marriott and Wyndham and those types of things, I will continue to help those companies grow. That happens to be my strength. My other two business partners have other strengths that are going to play into that nicely, and I did get one of those partners that's very intimately involved in those industries. So you got to stack the deck for the industry that you're going into. So in our scenario, we actually just acquired $1 million worth of EBITDA in pool companies, or a pool company, and then we'll stack another $5 million here shortly, and our 2-year journey will start on that front. So here's your to-do list if this sounds interesting. But first thing, don't sell your agency. Second thing, don't sell your soul. Don't do this if you don't have an extra 5 hours a week to start to dabble into this space. And I would start with that kind of 3 to 5 hour a week commitment to learn this space. Second things, let's call it those are bonus steps, preambles. Source 7 potential deals within your network. I can give you the language as to how I would start to kind of go into those conversations. Save up money for legal, diligence, and counsel. Ideally, some mentorship along the way in that journey. Begin the diligence of 7 deals. Deploy LOIs to the good ones. Build a pitch deck for private equity and debt providers. Ideally, you get into a position where you have 3 to 4 candidate companies. Notice we started with 7 and we got down to 3. Your ratio might not even be that good, to be honest. I kissed a lot of frogs to get down to these 3 deals that I really like. Mixed metaphor, sorry. Grow them and shop the deal to the mid-market, and then sell the portfolio for 7x. Can you consult for equity along this journey? For sure. Could you buy one company along this journey? For sure. Is this the easiest way to do this? Have the highest amount of results, not PG the debt, and do it at a really high level and a high efficacy for your investors with